All right. Okay. Well, let's throw it open.
Mike, I've been thinking the last few weeks. A lot of groups, a lot of teachings now are ascending, going up, and then it's declarations and legislations, and they're doing that, and they're thinking, they might be doing legislation on another part of the earth or something like that in Japan or whatever. But I guess where I'm coming from, there's no emphasis at all on benches, 3, 12, 7, 12. And I know that people, from what I've understood from talking or reading, is they kind of think, well, you know what? We're going up. I hang out with these different people. They're not a bench. And they're doing legislation. They're doing decrees. That's what it's all about. The earth's being changed. We're bringing heaven to earth. And I'm wondering, and I think that's great. But I'm wondering if it'd be possible to refresh. There is a difference. They're both important.
Yeah. I think if you have a mandate to do something, then by all means you can go and legislate for that mandate, and that might be a corporate mandate that you have with a group of people to do something, but it would not have a blueprint attached to it. Otherwise, if you have a blueprint, you need a bench, because a bench is the governmental heaven manifesting within that, which brings the government of it. So if you've got an ecclesia, if you've got any form of physical place, if you've got a city of refuge, embassy of heaven, any of those type of things, if you've got, like, say, I'm part of a local bench for our area and a regional bench for our region, that has a mandate which I could not fulfill on my own, because God wants us to work together, and he's got a governmental thing that means that you're not doing things independently. I can legislate for my own life on my own mountains. I can rule and govern and legislate for the outworking of my destiny, my scroll. As soon as I connect with other people, I'm looking for, does this have a corporate mandate, and therefore does it need a bench to actually administrate that? So a physical ecclesia, embassy of heaven, needs a bench of 3, which is a representation, a reflection of heaven's government, a bench of 7. And then depending on what it's called to do, you could have a bench of 12, which represents the mountains of government that ecclesia has. And that's, they're all sort of reflecting, Father, Son, and Spirit, 7 spirits of God, 12 elders, and there are lots of 12 elders coming together to bring old and new together in that sense. And there could well be other benches, because each of your mountains would have a bench, because it's a governmental place which is not independent, and it's not personal. So for me, any mandate that is not personal, you should be looking for a bench to bring the government. Otherwise, it doesn't reflect heaven, and I think a large group of people could have a mandate, but if it's to reflect heaven, then there should be a bench attached to it. Otherwise, where's the government? If it's just one person who's organizing it all, that isn't a reflection of heaven's government. So for me, I would say anything that has a corporate mandate, you should be looking for heaven's government, which would be a bench. Potentially, that could be, you could see, well, Father, Son, and Spirit, they may be the bench of 3 towards something, and you have a bench of 7. But I see it as reflecting heaven. And if there's something corporate, then I would see it should really be looking at, do we have a blueprint, which is a mandate for what this is? God has called us to do, let's say, okay, God has called us to legislate into Japan. Okay. Now, individually, I could do that if I had a mandate to do it. If then I'm coming together governmentally, let's say you as a group, you engage and God gives you a mandate from Japan. Well, you have a bench that releases that. Now, overseas, whatever it is, ministry or whatever, could be one of your mountains. So one of your mountains could be Japan, for instance, or it could be just a generic, you have authority to administrate into other nations or other areas. So you have a mountain, then eventually you would have a bench on that mountain that would facilitate you engaging in Japan, and they would be part of the blueprint, but they would have their own mandate for that mountain that works together with all the other mountains, because they're not independent, they're interdependent, and they work together. So our bench of 12 is representative of our mountains, and they meet with us as a bench of 3. In fact, we've got a meeting tonight, in which we will then look at governmental legislative issues that affect everybody. So they affect all the different mountains, they affect what we're doing, our overall blueprint and mandate. All that is governed as heaven's governed. If you're just going up there, where's the accountability to a blueprint that God has given, and the government is occupied around a blueprint? Otherwise, it's like anyone can go around and do whatever they want, just because they fancy doing it, and there's no accountability for it. And it's one person could say, right, okay, I'm going to take you all on this ascension, and we're going to do this legislation in the Council of 70, whatever. And to be honest, if there is no mandate for that, people will just be having an imaginative trip, because it actually won't be governed, it won't be authorized, because there isn't a mandate to do it. And when it comes to corporate things, the reason God wants a bench of 3 is so that there's not down to one person who makes all the decisions independently of everyone else. That's the safety and security of relationship within a governmental structure designed to facilitate a release of blessing to others and an empowering of others, not a controlling of others, and a directing of others to what to do. It's like, I'm engaged with you, and I'm here to be a place where you can bounce things off and you can ask questions and everything else. I have no government towards you whatsoever. I do have a government in that I'm part of a Freedom Apostolic Resources mountain here that has a mandate to equip others. But that is to release, to equip. It does not cover anybody. It just gets alongside people to help them. If people are going up into heaven and then doing all sorts of things, well, who authorizes that? Is that a random event that you could get a mandate for, a random event? If it becomes a regular thing, well, what is this group called to do? Where is the government to it? Because it will have it. Otherwise, it isn't a reflection of the kingdom. If it's one person, I would suggest that isn't a reflection of heaven, more one person's desire for a position of authority in which they tell other people what to do or lead people. That might sound a bit harsh, but in reality, we want things that reflect heaven. And if they're not reflecting heaven and they're not reflecting the kingdom, then they're a whole load of people doing independent things without any accountability. See, I can't do anything independent of my Freedom Apostolic Ministries bench, because I'm part of that bench and we make decisions based on a mandate that we've got. We're doing conferences and intensives next year. We got a mandate from God to do that. We agreed it. As an overall bench of 3, we also agreed it, and the bench of 12 agreed it, because we wanted to make sure everyone was actually on board, that we were believing that God had called us to do these things, and therefore everyone has a part to play in it. The far bench is the bench that received the mandate, and then the other benches came into agreement with that mandate to empower it. Well, that brings safety and safeguarding all through everything you do, that we're all interdependent, accountable to one another, bringing a unity of agreement with one another, which reflects heaven. If you just had one person, what's the difference in any old thing in the past? That's an old wineskin, where one person makes decisions for everyone else and tells them what God's saying. Totally different dynamic in that way. And I believe if it's a mandate that's given by God to more than, more than the one person, then it should be looking at what is the government attached to that mandate. Now, if it's just a one-off, I can see people can receive one-off mandates, or a group could receive a one-off mandate. But if it's something that's actually being administrated as a group to go and do legislative things, then I believe it should be a reflection of kingdom government, and therefore accountability within that, and responsibility, for what God is saying, but also the relationship within it. Otherwise it can be just a whole load of people doing a whole load of things which doesn't have any actual government towards it. And I think a lot of people aren't really understanding benches of 3, 7, or 12. Because I don't think a lot of people want accountability. So it's easier if you're on your own doing your own thing, because then you don't have to be accountable to anyone and you can just do whatever you want. That isn't how heaven functions. So if that's how people are functioning, that to me is not what a reflection of heaven, and I don't believe God will be honoring it. Others who set up benches to serve them, as we've talked about before, don't believe that is a heavenly reflection. That's an old model using a new terminology to just get people to do something for you, rather than everyone engaging to hear God for themselves as part of a bench. So I see that in what God is doing, some groups will pick up that which they like and reject that which they don't. And I don't think that's a good reflection of what God is wanting to do or how he's wanting to do it. In that with a bench, you have to work things through relationally. You can't have one person doing your own thing, or, as you've experienced, one person wanting to be the senior leader and then control everything's done. That isn't unity. That isn't how heaven works. It's not relational, and it's not the way I believe that God wants to establish heaven on earth. If heaven is going to be established on earth in an ecclesia, in an embassy of heaven, it will have a reflection of heaven's government in it. It won't have one person, the pastor, the apostle, the prophet, the leadership team, or whatever, without it having a reflection of heaven. And I think this is why God wants to bring this revelation, because then it will be empowered by him. If people are just putting a new patch on an old wineskin, it's not going to take any new wine of sonship. So it will just be people doing things in their own understanding, which I don't think ultimately is going to produce the results that everyone wants. People will have a lot of fun. How much of it has any effect, I have doubts over the effectiveness of people doing things independently without following the pattern that God ascribes. So for me, yes, it's harder to do benches of 3, 7, 12, because you have to work through all the relationship issues. You've got to work through all the mindsets, and we're continually reviewing what we're doing, and are we doing it from a new perspective? Are we doing it from an old perspective? Let's review how we did this. How is this working? Because we're in a process of transition and renewing of the mind. Therefore, we don't think necessarily in that new perspective all the time. Sometimes we default back. And therefore, it's a continual reviewing process to ensure that we're outworking things from a heavenly perspective, establishing things in heaven first. And God gave us a list of questions to look at right throughout our organizational structure, because we're not just an ecclesia, we're an ecclesia that's set up 4 or 5 different charities and companies to manage the things that we do in different areas, our work into the community, our housing work, our other aspects, our social enterprise work. They all have organizational things and legal structures that we've set up to deliver them. So we have to outwork the same principles through everything. And we were reviewing, how's this going? And we saw one area of this is working really well. This doesn't seem to be working too well. This isn't operating. The finances aren't here. There's more finances over here. Why? So there was a series of questions that God said, like, are you establishing everything in heaven first? Does everything you do have a bench of three attached to it? Are you administrating in heaven? And there were lots of questions, that were, okay, ooh, wow, we need to address this and look at, does our organization and everything that we do, is it consistent? So if you were to cut a slice right through the middle of it, would it look the same wherever you sliced it? Like we used to have candy called rock, and it was really hard candy, and in the middle they would have a name of the place, often a seaside place. When you cut it and slice through it, it was the same name all the way through the candy, and it's got to be the same. I think with us, we should be consistent in outworking the things that God's called us to do in the way he's calling us to do it. And we're having to address that here because it's complicated. It took us 3 or 4 years to arrange all the way in which we do things legally to ensure that the spiritual governance actually was there in through it. Because there are so many Christian organizations that start off with a Christian idea and end up going off into some other thing because they don't have the spiritual governance there, as well as the legal governance. So we've got several boards of trustees, several director boards that are all accountable to the bench of three, and the bench of three actually appoints them to make sure that we're consistent in what we do, and the same governance and the same spiritual authority operates through all. Now, we release them, we empower them, we don't tell them what to do, but they're accountable to us for the vision of fulfilling our blueprint. Because if they're not part of our blueprint, then we don't have any authority, so we shouldn't be doing it. So we've got to constantly review, is this what we're authorized to do? And make sure that it is. And if it isn't, then we stop doing it. But we're looking, so the blueprint becomes the sort of the plumb line, if you like, to then weigh, is this something that we should be doing? Does it fit into our blueprint? Yes. Then we have a mandate to do it. Does it fit within our blueprint? Yes. Is it within our area of jurisdiction? No. We can't do it then. We don't have any jurisdiction in Africa or China or anywhere else. So it may be something that we're called to do here, but we couldn't do it somewhere else. Now, we do have and spheres do expand, of course, because there's no end to the increase of his government. So God can add other jurisdictions or an expanding tent peg jurisdictions. So, most of what we've done into the community has been based locally. But we have a expanding thing there to do regional things as well. And so we're connected with other groups in other parts of our region to work together in cooperation so that we can support and encourage what we're doing and share best practice and help and encourage us to outwork that in working with other organizations. So we're practically doing that. But it took time to get all those things in place because God told us about 4 years ago to remove all the barriers between the organization. Now, you can't remove legal barriers because they are but they are all, the members of all those organizations are the bench of three. And therefore, all the organizations are legally actually there to report to the bench of three. So that there is an accountability to fulfilling our mandate in our blueprint. But the bench of three empowers. It doesn't control. It empowers and safeguards everything to make sure that everything's in line with what we're authorized to do. Otherwise, if we start doing things that we don't have any authority to do, then we're going to do it in our own strength. So it's making sure that everything comes from a perspective of a mandate that we've got. Now I believe a group could go into heaven, seek for a mandate, get a mandate, and do something. And that's can happen. I'm not saying that can't happen. But if that group was doing something every week that way, I would expect there to be a government within that group that is a heavenly reflection of government.
So as a general rule of thumb then, for the kingdom's government and heaven to be established on the earth, it's going to have to be done, generally speaking, through his blueprint, through his structure of a bench, which will then begin to reflect and establish his government here on earth.
Yeah. Otherwise, well, what's the point?
And that's a basic thing that can be basically said. It's that it's going to be through his blueprint, through his structure of a bench here on earth, being reflected out.
Yeah, definitely. And there could also be mandates for something which doesn't have a physical location on earth.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't have a bench, because a bench is a governmental structure that enables the kingdom to be manifested, because it is a governmental kingdom. So even if, like our regional bench, you know, we've got on Saturday, we've got a conference that we're doing with Justin Abraham stuff. We're doing that. We have a mandate regionally as a regional bench. We don't have a physical location. Our mandate is not to establish a physical location. Our mandate is to facilitate the kingdom and government coming into our region through others who receive their authority to establish things in our region on the ground. So our mandate does set, we all have things on the ground, but that is not from that mandate of the regional bench. Our regional mandate is to equip, release, encourage, support the government of God being established in our region through others. Yeah, so therefore, we can put on a conference that is looking to help engage people so that heaven can engage earth and change earth, which is what we're doing on Saturday. We're doing that because we have a mandate to release government. You know, that's our mandate, to call it into being. Whether any of those people know us or not is irrelevant, because we're there not to provide some overall apostolic covering that they all have to report to us. It's the opposite. We're a foundational government that calls others, whether they know it or not. And should there be other government forms, it will not, other than any relationship we have any organizational link. Because that's not what we're mandated to do. We're not mandated to franchise what we're doing. We're there to help people. That's simple as that. No other mandates can do it. So that would be a heavenly bench that outworks into the earth, but doesn't have a physical location. But it's still a bench. Otherwise, it doesn't reflect government, and therefore it doesn't have any authority.
I just want to take it one step further for a second. If, say, Ruth is on our bench, okay, but she then does independently ascensions where she's doing declarations and legislation, the group of people she's going up with every second week, independent of us, and we have no idea what she does. Her being joined to us has nothing to do with our bench and a reflection of what we're to do. And it would actually, for her to do that, it can't be said, Ruth can't say, well, I'm part of a bench over here, therefore it's tied into over there. It doesn't work like that, because that bench where we are has to understand and be part of that mandate in order for it to be part of it.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. You can't say, well, I'm a bench somewhere and that authorizes me to do anything. You know, and well, it's okay because I'm part of this bench. Well, that bench may not have that mandate or blueprint for whatever someone's doing. Now, on the flip side of that, because someone is part of a local ecclesia, that doesn't mean that they can't do things for their own blueprint, which are outside of the local blueprint. You know, if someone came to us and said, I really have a blueprint to establish something in Africa, we look at our blueprint and it's like, well, we don't feel that that is something corporately that we have jurisdiction to do, but how can we bless and support you in what you're called to do? Because you may need to go and set up an NGO or something to deliver that. It won't be in any way governed by us, but we will help you, because that might be your blueprint. That might be your scroll. Yes, your destiny to do that. So we would never say you can't do it because it doesn't line up with us, but we also won't do something just because someone else is called to do it.
Mike, you're in more than one bench, but are all your benches related to freedom, your overall bench, or no?
No.
In other words, could one of your benches be totally independent and separate and apart from your other benches, which are related?
Totally. Because what I'm doing regionally is not in any way jurisdictionally governed by what I'm doing locally. Because that is me personally called to be part of a regional bench.
But they are repeated, are they not?
Bench of 3 here can't say to me, you can't be part of a regional bench, because that's my personal call. Now, do they support what I'm doing? Yes, because our overall blueprint is to equip people. So they would see that as a natural outworking of who we are. Now, we relate to the people on that regional bench, but we don't relate to them because there is any structural relationship. We relate because there's relationship. I introduced the others of that bench in various things because we thought, hey, let's get together as organizations and let's worship together. So we all came together and God said, hey, I want you to covenant with one another. So we're like, oh, okay, what does that mean? I don't know. But God said it, so let's do it and then we'll figure it out. So we have a relationship, but it's purely relationship. And we have a mandate to do certain things together. But that's nothing to do with that regional bench. The regional bench doesn't dictate that. The local bench doesn't dictate to it, but there may be some interaction relationally or not. And of course, the regional is there to bless the local. And we found that just by being together regionally, each of our individual things that we're involved with has been blessed as just an outflowing of life, a consequence of it. And that's, I believe everything should be relational. And therefore you want to look at where does those relationships bless one another, because that's what relationships do. But there's no structural thing. In the mountains that are actually part of our blueprint, our 12 mountains, they are all working together in that one blueprint, and they're all interacting and interdependent with each other. And therefore, there's an accountability and there's a responsibility for the fulfillment of the blueprint, but in the way each of the mountains contributes to it. So the bench of 3 doesn't say to the, health mountain, you've got to do this and you've got to do it this way. The bench of 3 says, we release the health mountain to get a mandate from heaven and to bring health to us and to help facilitate us living in health and ministering health to our community, to whatever areas of jurisdiction we have. So they operate by hearing God for themselves, but sharing that with others so that we're all aware relationally of what's going on. And therefore we can help and support each other. And sometimes we do corporate things to facilitate the whole. So we get legislation, which then is able to be used by all our mountains, because it's part of the whole. My regional or local sort of thing isn't in any way structurally linked to what's going on here physically, but is relationally linked. That's the whole thing. People can relate or not. That's the thing. It's like we probably relating to, 100 people in our region purely to help and encourage them should they want it. If they decide they don't want any ongoing connection with us, then we don't. There's nothing there which is structural, organizational from a, hey, we're all set up this, apostolic network that you all have to ascribe to if you want any help from us. We don't do that because that's an old model. The new model is to bless people relationally. So, yeah. But it is definitely a big issue, because a lot of people, pick up new things. Great, we can ascend, we can go into the heavens, we can do these things, but don't see the bigger picture of the overall of what that's about. And if it's to do with God's kingdom, then God's kingdom is governmental and has a relational governmental way of doing things. It's so easy for people to do things, and they don't really want to be relational, because then they have to relate to people. And some people don't like relating to people, just like doing their own thing. And as soon as someone, when you're in a relationship, turns around and says, well, why are you doing that? What's God said to you? Well, I'm not telling you. Well, that isn't relationship. That's not openness or honesty or transparency or a culture of honor, which is what the relationships need in place to be able to facilitate God's kingdom, everyone growing in their identity and authority as a son of God. No, within the kingdom, there should be no lone rangers or loose cannons. We should all be in relationship with somebody. And if we can't be in relationship to anyone, we've got to look at me and why I can't relate to anybody. Well, I might not want to, and deal with the issues in my soul that may be lack of trust, maybe still hurt from the past, maybe suspicion, maybe fear, all those things that potentially stop us outworking the things that God's kingdom wants us to establish in terms of the restoration of all things, is because we are still controlled by our soul. I have no issue sharing anything that I'm doing and anything God's saying with everyone here, because I'm totally free to share and be me, and I don't do that independently.
Yeah. So on that, like, our souls are damaged, like, and like it's like, there's energy based. My cat's trying to get in here. Energy is never destroyed, right? So it's like our soul's bonded to our hurts, our past, and our worries into our future, instead of being into our now. So basically, I guess God's highlights when we have to deal with an issue, that so he can actually fix our soul. Because, like, I feel like I'm fragmented. Part of me keeps going back to the hurts or something, and then all of a sudden you have to basically try and deal with it. So relationally, it is very hard, because everybody has their own hurts and problems. So when you're in a bench, it does become difficult to sometimes, because, like, I tend to be always in a hurry. so I don't seem to have that patience, because I'm thinking, well, why can't we just go to heaven and do this all the time? Why do we have to sit and discuss it? Like, to me, I'd rather be up there finding out what God wants to do than down here being relational with people. So that's part of my problem. So
yeah, I mean, the soul is the area that gets challenged when we begin to do things relationally, because it brings up memories and past experiences and past relationships and other things, which, if we don't deal with, they keep us hiding from the openness and transparency and honesty that we'll both be able to give and receive from others. See, I don't believe that I can be an island independent of other people and grow to maturity, full maturity, because God uses people in that process to mature me, both those that create frustrations, and I have to deal with why, and deal with the relational outfall of why we struggle with some people more than others. But also there's a sense where if I honor somebody, I receive from them. And as a bench of three, we honor our different gifts, the different aspects of that we have. Therefore, we can receive from each other as well as give to each other. And then you have this way in which how Jesus functioned was in relationship with the Father, and the Father was flowing through him. There was no sort of looking for, oh, look at me, look at what I've done, because you're serving the whole, you know. And in essence, you know, even in my own life, my own destiny, my own scroll is to be a son in relationship with the Father. It's never independent, you know, and it is difficult. And the talking and the sharing and the being with each other relationally is the foundation to government. Not what you do in the heavens, but the fact that when you come together, you are manifesting heaven, that you're in. See, when we, as our bench of three, we don't step into heaven hardly at all. I'm already in heaven. So whatever's flowing out of me is flowing from heaven anyway. And heaven is manifested around us while we're in discussion. So creativity begins to flow. Now, we don't have to go into heaven and say, oh, God, can you give us a strategy, when we're already seeing a strategy manifesting as we're together. And occasionally when we get with the 12, we'll go and do something from a heavenly perspective, because it's just part of learning to do that. But when you are functioning in dual realms, in a sense, wherever you are, you're a manifestation of an open heaven. The heaven's manifesting around you. You are a gateway of that heaven manifesting. And when you come together corporately, that's a flow of three windows of heaven, if you like, or gateways coming through each of you into that situation. But it does require trust of one another, and that has to develop. You know, you can't demand trust. It has to come through relationship, which is why you have to be relational for that to outwork. If we all just stepped into heaven and didn't ever talk to one another or relate to one another, there would be no way of relating, and that relationship actually being part of me growing and maturing. Because I learned things from other people. You know, I get challenged by other people. Someone shares something or shares a vision, shares what's going on with them, and that stirs me to, wow, well, I'll go and look at that. You know, and I can also share some of the things that are happening with me to stir and encourage others. Now, because of the way, you know, I operate, I am probably more flowing from that because I've spent a lot of time practicing and engaging it, and I'm helping the others to come into that same place themselves. So I do receive a lot of stuff that flows out of heaven because I'm talking to God all the time about things, and I'm a source of that. But whenever I bring, I submit. Just because I bring it, I don't say, oh, great, I brought this, so this carries more authority and weight than whatever you're bringing. I have to submit it to our bench. Say, look, I was engaging God the other day. I felt God say this. Here, what do you think? And then we then weigh that and put it into perspective of, well, what does God want us to do? And often, I don't come up with what God wants us to do, because other people are better at that than me. And that's the bit that they bring. They see something that God says, and they're like, wow, how does this fit into what God's doing at the moment? We're in this, and they outwork it. You know, like on Sunday, we've got a special day. It's not special in one sense, but God has said something is going to take place. So there's this golden river that's going to come out of heaven, blah, blah, blah. So we were like, oh, great. No, I didn't get that. Someone else did. I thought, oh, I totally resonate with that, because I've seen rivers coming out of heaven, and that we had like 7 rivers flowing out of heaven, you know, in the past. And it was just like, oh, wow. Okay, well, what's it going to do? So we start talking about it. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, what's going to hinder that? And each of us felt that the dynamic that would hinder people embracing something new was disappointment in the past. So it was like, okay, if people are disappointed with themselves, with others, with God, because people won't admit that, but a lot of people are disappointed with God. Either they were believing and had unreal expectation of something, but they can hold that towards God, and you have to acknowledge it with him so that you can deal with it, get it put into perspective. So we felt, okay, there's some stuff that God is wanting to do, but we also feel that there's some hindrances. Let's deal with that. So then we solicited the help of the bench of 12 to say, okay, we feel we need to look at this. What are we going to do? And one of the bench of 12 said, I'll share something on this so that we can minister for the previous 2 weeks, make sure that all the disappointment that could hinder what God wants to do, it has an opportunity of being dealt with, and we'll engage that. And so, yeah, we did. 2 weeks ago, my wife shared a whole thing of disappointment and forgiveness and how do you deal with disappointment. This week, she recapped, and then we did some activations around it. You know, I used some of the singing bowls to release sounds and frequencies that would go back into people's generational lines and unveil disappointment within epigenetic factors in DNA, all sorts of stuff. It was really good. But all that came out of not going into heaven and having some massive heavenly strategy, but actually manifesting heaven around us creatively so that we could then begin to outwork what God was revealing and showing. And, we probably have a lot of visitors on Sunday because we've got this conference on Saturday. And they're going to benefit from the fact that they're coming to engage this golden river that's going to be poured out of heaven. So they're going to have a good time. Not that it was engineered by us to do that, but hey, God has a bigger picture in place when he told us about it. So, so definitely the soul can get in the way if we allow it to rule through fear or any other emotional things to stop us or hindering us. Because Father, Son, and Spirit never do anything independent of one another. Everything's done in a relationship and in a conversation. They do different things, but they're all done together representing one. And I think when we do things as a bench, we're representing what that blueprint is. We're not there in ourselves, you know what I mean? It's like, we serve the blueprint that God's given. It's his vision. It's not ours. Those people always talk about my vision and this vision, and I got this vision, well, where did it come from? God. Well, therefore it's God's vision that you've got a privilege of being able to participate in. But when you call it your vision, then it all automatically excludes other people from it. Or you need other people to fulfill your vision, so you have to in some way recruit them to fulfill your vision, which is what the whole old system's all about. Trying to get people to fulfill someone else's vision. Whereas if you all see it as God's vision, then you can see, do I feel part of God's vision? Do I resonate with this vision that God's given? And therefore, what's my part to play in it? Which inevitably will be relational, because we're living stones that have to be glued together by relationships in love. So the encouragement would be, make sure that the soul doesn't get in the way, and if it starts to isolate, separate, operate independently, then there's usually a hurt, a pain, a lack of trust, or something that's related to that in the past, which is still affecting the present. And getting, opening ourselves up to allow God to highlight what that is. Some people are stuck. Like the lie busting thing, people get stuck emotionally through different trauma. Disappointment can be a traumatic thing. that actually gets us stuck emotionally at a particular age. So some people are fractured because of disappointment and other things, which then means it's difficult to act as a whole and to be in peace, soul, spirit, body, functioning together in unison when there are fractured parts, because we are still unhealed in areas of our soul. So. Okay. Yeah.
Mike, some of the advantages to the bench is that they also support each other. The relationship, actually, we support one another.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it was 2 weeks ago when we discussed this thing and came to more or less the same conclusions of why benches are important, and your confirmation actually that we were on the right path. But I think what Ruth was saying is that this DIY system is always operating. It's like you address this in old versus new. And I realized just a day, I think it was day before yesterday, I was reading the Mirror Bible. And very often I had to go back to look at an old version, the American Standard Version, because some of the stuff is like too good to be true, And I was saying, I've read the same passages in the AFC, and I was condemning myself. And not only one passage, many passages. And then I caught myself and I said, well, this is the DIY system operating. It's like a yo-yo, and you have to watch yourself, because suddenly you find instead of the gospel of grace, you're sort of going back. So my question is, how do we know, how do we avoid this constant yo-yoing between the old system and the new?
Well, it's a process. I mean, renewing the mind happens when you identify that's a wrong way of thinking. Therefore, I need to engage the truth, which is relationally in Jesus, as the truth, the way, the truth, the life. So that I change. So I become more like him. So the more I spend the time reflecting who he really is and what he's really like, the more that is going to determine how I see myself, how I feel about myself, and how I then function out of that relationship. And yeah, reading some of those scriptures that have been, we're familiar with from another version of the Bible, sometimes it will stimulate, this is what I used to think, or this is what I still do think. So then, then I look at something like the Mirror Bible, or I take it back to God himself and say, what do you really mean by this? When this was written, what does it actually mean? What did you want me to receive from reading this? Now, obviously that can be millions of things, and they may be different things every time I read it. But generally, there's going to be truth within it that's aligned with who God is and the truth that he wants us to embrace, which will never be anything other than loving. It will never condemn or make us feel guilty. It's only there to bring the revelation of that truth, impart it to us, so that will enable us to be who God called us to be, and to outwork that relationally with him. And anything that separates us from God, anything that makes us feel guilty, anything which is not love, it isn't coming from God. Therefore, the religious things that created those condemnations are a result of the DIY system of works and performance, that we have to do something to be loved, to be forgiven, to be accepted, to be approved of, which is the religious mindsets that we've all been brought up with. And now God is saying, hey, it's all free. It's like, this is just too good to be true. You mean that I'm already forgiven? You already made me alive? You And it all happened through the cross. Yeah. But if I am not believing it, it doesn't outwork in my life. So I have to go beyond the, well, this is what it says, to this is how it outworks in my life. So I am coming from a loved, accepted, approved of position in relationship with God that frees me to be me. But every time, a mindset sort of rears its head, then we've got an opportunity of embracing, why do I think this way? What areas of my mind needs to change? Does my mind need to be deconstructed in this area? Is there still a theological pillar still in place that's holding up a belief system that is being challenged? Because it's through those challenges that we change. That's the key. It isn't just, we just wander along and everything just changes. It's when we recognize something needs changing, often there's a confrontation of some sort that brings that to the surface. A challenge of mindsets, a challenge of beliefs, and experiences which then challenge what I used to believe. And now I've experienced something which doesn't line up with what I used to believe. So I now can change, But the change comes through relational encounter, not through me trying to change my mind by confessing the truth over and over again, hopefully that I might believe it sometime. Ultimately, truth is a person, so I engage the truth, and the truth I know by personal experience and relationship sets me free to be who I was always intended to be, but that which has been robbed from me by all those religious systems and everything else. Okay, awesome. I'm going to leave it there because I've got to start this other meeting, and I'll have all these people sort of like trying to get in saying, he's in another meeting. Yeah.
Okay, Mike, thanks.
But I'll catch up with you next time.
Great conference.
Have a good day, and I'll see you all soon.